Hey, Shalom, YASHAYA. This is Officer Nashah, and I got the brother AHAYAH with me today. And I pray to the Spirit of the Most High that edification is brought forth through this lesson. This lesson is going to be called "You Have to Work for It." I don't want to deal with this because every day we're going to have to work for it, and it's not going to be easy. But in the internet age, which I was kind of born into, and many of the brothers and sisters online, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. We're used to instant gratification. Well, in the time of our forefathers, there was no such thing as email. If they wanted to get a message, they had to wait days, months. It might even took a year for a letter to get a place. When they wanted to go when they go from here to there, they didn't just hop in their car, and travel at 60 plus miles an hour down a freeway. A lot of times they were walking. Horses and camels and stuff like that cost money, and you didn't have money, you were on foot. So our forefathers were walking through the desert on their trade routes, going to work. They didn't have these big tractor combines plowing their fields. They had a couple oxen and a very rudimentary plow, made out of wood that's digging into the ground, that they got to hold up. And it wasn't easy, but what it did is it allowed them to build up strength and resolve to become self-sufficient, which is going to be very important moving forward. Because believe it or not, here in Babylon, even those of us who have everyday, have regular jobs, have become self-sufficient. Because, I've always been a sort of an entrepreneur, and I don't want anyone of a job to be offended by what I'm about to say, but it is the truth of the matter. When you have a job, you're depending on your employer to provide work for you. And then if the employer doesn't have work to provide for you, what happens? They lay people off. And so even in, the best case scenario for a lot of us, we're still dependent. We're still not self-sufficient. If you look in the Middle East and you look at the people, when Ishmael comes over here, the reason why they open up these stores and, they have liquor stores and gas stations and markets is that's actually built into their culture. When you go over to their country, they have bazaars and fruit stands and all these. Everyone has a business. Everyone has a trade, and no one is just, there are people who work for them, but the majority of the people have something to offer, of value. And so this is going to be very important when we're moving forward, when we're trying to break ourselves with the programming of the system, to become self-sufficient, to learn to work for it. It's much harder being an entrepreneur than working for the entrepreneur, but it also is a lot riskier, which is where faith comes in. But let's get into the scriptures real quick. I don't want to be too long-winded on everything. We're going to start in the book of Proverbs, chapter 6, verse 6. Once again, that's going to be the book of Proverbs, chapter 6, verse 6.
The book of Proverbs, chapter 6, verse 6. Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways, and be wise. Verse 7. Which having no guide, overseer, or ruler. Verse 8. Provideth her meat in the summer, and gathereth her food in the harvest. 9. How long wilt thou sleep, O sluggard? When wilt thou arise out of thy sleep? Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands, sleep. Verse 11. So shalt thou die slacketh. Poverty come as one that travaileth, and thy want as an armed man.
So it says, go to the ant, consider its ways. And I don't know if any of you have ever examined ants, but they're a remarkable animal or creature, I should say. a creeping thing, I guess is what the scriptures would call them. They are a very remarkable creeping thing. It says having no guide, no overseer, or no ruler. So, yes, we understand the queen, ants have a queen, what they all work for. But they don't got no supervisor out there. They don't got no boss they answer to. They go out there and they work for it. They do the work. And I remember one day I was looking down at some ants, and I don't know how many ants there were. It was quite a few of them, but they were carrying a stick. And you have to imagine the size of an ant compared to even the smallest of twigs. A twig is probably 10, 20, 30 times the size of the ant. And what these ants had done is they had all gathered together to pick up this twig. To put it in something maybe a little bit more understandable, it would be like if, we were in the forest and we cut down a tree and we all picked up that huge tree and carried it together. So not only do, the ants go out and they find the work themselves and they do the work, but they also are smart about it and they bind together to make the big projects happen. I don't know what they need the twig for. I'm sure it was something very important. They're putting a lot of effort into it. But, when you guys all get a chance, research ants and what they do. He didn't put this example in there for no reason. They are the hardest working animal, I feel like, or one of the hardest working creations. You read verse 8 again?
Verse 8, provideth her meat in the summer, and gathereth her food in the harvest.
And so there's a time to work, all right? And it's a time to build up and store for the times when you're not going to be able to go out, and get food. And that's what the ant does. Right? It gathers up during the harvest time, so during the summertime, it makes sure that they have stuff to eat. They have food for their mouths. They have water. And this is exactly what we have to do moving forward. We have to stop working just for tomorrow, or working just to pay these bills. We have to all find a way to break ourselves of that training, or we'll forever be mired in this system. We all have different gifts and skills, and there's something we all can do to, break the mold of what they have us trapped in. Because to be honest, they lied to us. This is what I was told growing up. I'm not going to say it's a complete lie, but it's not an absolute truth. They told me, go to school, get a good job, or get good grades in elementary, get good grades in junior high, get good grades in high school so I can get a good college, get good grades in college so I can get a good job so I can get a good house, get a good house so I can get a good wife so I can have a good family. But we look at the world of today, and we know that there's absolutely no guarantee of any of that. Half of all graduate students actually end up moving back home with their parents and working at Taco Bell and doing the same thing that people without degrees are doing. And the issue here is the wealthy people, what they teach their children is how to be self-sufficient and have people working for you. And then what they teach us is how to work to make someone else self-sufficient. And so we got to get out of that. But it's going to take work. And a lot of us, I'm going to say a lot of people in this generation, I'm going to speak on my generation. I can't speak for the older generation because they're used to the hard work. They didn't grow up with the internet. They didn't grow up with the microwave instant generation. I'm going to say, speaking a little bit more to the younger people who may be in the crowd. But it does go for everyone. It's going to take hard work, definitely. Let's move on. Let's go over to Proverbs chapter 10, verse 26. Once again, the book of Proverbs, chapter 10, verse 26. And remember, you can always find something to do that's constructive, and it will keep you from being idle. Because when you become idle, or you're not putting your full effort and whatnot, that leaves room for Satan. I don't think it's a scripture, but it says the devil makes work for idle hands. Read.
Proverbs chapter 10, verse 26. As vinegar to the teeth, and as smoke to the eyes, so is the sluggard to them that send him.
And so this is how sluggards, people who aren't willing to work hard or don't think they have to work hard are viewed. They're viewed as like, I don't know if you ever had smoke in your eye, but it's not pleasant. And there's nothing worse than entrusting someone who's lazy to do a job. It's like you might as well be cutting your own hand off. And in the end, when you're that lazy person, it ends up being that nobody actually wants your help. We all know that person. We were in a group project. We knew wasn't going to do anything, so we really didn't want them in our group. And so that's why it's very important to learn the value of working hard, and becoming self-sufficient. Because the people who are actually self-sufficient are the most valuable people in our society. Even the world tells you that. The people who don't need, I'm not going to say don't need anyone, but the people who can survive for the most part on their own and make their own way are much more valuable than people who are used to, for all intents and purposes, I'll say, leeching off others. And that's kind of the position that they put us in this country, to just be, that's what we're doing when we're working for someone. We're kind of leeching off the work that they provided for them. Once again, I'm not saying this to offend anyone. I'm saying this because, we gotta change our mindset on how we work in the future. Let's move on. Let's go over to the book of Proverbs. We're going to stay in Proverbs. We're going to go to chapter 13, verse 4. Once again, book of Proverbs, chapter 13, verse 4.
Proverbs 13, verse 4. The soul of the sluggard desireth, and hath nothing, but the soul of the diligent shall be made fat.
So that's common sense. The sluggard, he didn't out there and work. He'd get rich quick. He didn't put no real effort in. He didn't put no time in. He's going to be hungry. He's not going to have anything. But the soul who knows the value of hard work, putting in long days, back-breaking work, we're going back towards that. I hope everyone sees that, especially in the times to come where no man will be able to buy or sell. We're going to have to put this work in to get by. We're going to have to go back to the ways of our fathers, and it wasn't easy, but I'd rather be working hard and self-sufficient than take the mark. It's easy to take the mark. Let's go, we're going to stay in Proverbs. We're almost done in here. We're going to go to Proverbs chapter 20, verse 4. Once again, the book of Proverbs chapter 20, verse 4.
Proverbs 20, verse 4. The sluggard will not plow by reason of the cold. Therefore shall he beg in harvest and have nothing.
And the people who are lazy and not willing to put in the work now, they're going to be the same people when we're fleeing Babylon or when we're established somewhere else. They're going to be begging to come. That's one of the reasons why we set up the Hebrew Fund. So we can see really who's serious about leading and who's serious about helping their brothers and sisters. Because who knows, you might put a lot into the Hebrew Fund, and it might come that when it's time to leave, that you don't have the money to leave. But because you did the work, and you contributed, you won't have to be begging and have nothing, and have no ticket, have no way out, have no food. And so it's important that we put the work in now. And really, if you do nothing, you should expect nothing. We have to be ready to work in any season, so whether it's hot, cold, rain, slow. I don't know the whole the mailman motto, But we all get our mail every day, right? It doesn't matter what the weather is. You know, I've seen them on TV. They're kicking snow out the stairs, all that. They're making sure the mail comes. You know, but it becomes easier for us to have these things, you know, built into us when we're following the will of the Most High. And so with that, we're gonna go to 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 2. Once again, this is the book of 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 2.
2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 2. Preach the word, be instant in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with all longsuffering and doctrine. Verse 3. For the time will come when they will not endure with sound doctrine, but after their own lusts shall they heap to themselves teachers, having itching ears. Verse 4. And they shall turn away their ears from the truth, and shall be turned into fables. Verse 5. But watch thou in all things, endure afflictions, do the work of the everlasting, and make full proof of thy ministry.
So do the work of the evangelist, you know, and so we should always be ready to speak this truth, you know, in season, out of season. If it's raining, if it's 110 degrees outside, you know, we got to do this work. But that same work ethic has to transfer over into everything else we do. You know, we can't have the zeal for the Most High and be out there hitting the streets, and then we're not providing for our family. You know, we're not doing what we need to do to take care of our own selves. You know, it has to be an all-around thing. We're going to go back to Proverbs real quick. I'm going to go Proverbs chapter 26, verse 13. Once again, that's Proverbs chapter 26, verse 13. You know, because people who are used to working hard, they won't have any excuses. You know, and you'll be able to very easily see who the lazy people are in the world by the things that they say, as the scripture is going to demonstrate. So once again, that's the book of Proverbs, chapter 26, verse 13.
Proverbs chapter 26, verse 13. The slothful man saith, there is a lion in the streets.
There's a lion outside. I can't do nothing, man. Like, if I go out there, I'm going to die. You know, it's always going to be something with them. And so the Most High is giving you wisdom on who to have on your team and who not to have on your team. Continue.
Verse 14. As the door turneth upon his hinges, so doth the slothful upon his bed.
Mm-hmm.
15. The slothful hideth his hand in his bosom. It grieveth him to bring it again to his mouth.
What it's saying here is, this brother is so lazy, he won't even do what's required to feed himself. He won't even pick that apple up off the ground, you know, and put it to his mouth to eat. You know, there's people out there like that who just feel like they shouldn't have to do anything, and, you know, they can get by and they should be fed and clothed and housed. And so we have to be very wary of these people. Continue.
Verse 16. The sluggard is wiser in his own conceit than 7 men that can render a reason.
And, you know, these people will not listen to counsel. You know, and I have to admit, I was lazy like this at one point, and people were telling me, you should do this, you should do that, you should do this, you should do that, and I never wanted to listen. You know, and I could say there's probably at least 7 people that came and told me. But these people, they won't listen to sound judgment, you know, just to go do something, do this, you know, do that. And they'll think they're wiser than the people who are doing all right. You know, so just remember that. You know, those who are lazy are going to look to make excuses as to why they can't do something, even to the point of lying. There's brothers and sisters out there, they'll lie just because they don't want to do something. These same individuals have a distortion of reality where they believe that they are smarter than those who work hard. And so we got to be wary of these brothers and sisters. We have to remember, the system has pushed us into being this way. Let's move on. We're going to go actually into the book of Sirach. That's Ecclesiasticus, chapter 29, verse 2. Once again, that's the book of Sirach, chapter 29, verse 2.
Ecclesiasticus, chapter 29, verse 2. Lend to thy neighbor in time of need, and pay thou thy neighbor again in due season. 3. Keep thy word and deal faithfully with him, and thou shalt always find the things that is necessary for thee.
So you're always supposed to help your brothers and sisters out, in their time of need. That's a righteous act according to the Most High. But then we have people out here like it's going to describe. Continue.
Verse 4. Many, when a thing was lent them, reckoned it to be found, and put them to trouble that helped them.
And so sometimes you help somebody out, and they'll act like, oh, that was just what you're supposed to do, and they'll cause you trouble. Continue.
5. Till he hath received, he will kiss a man's hand, and for his neighbor's money he will speak submissively. But when he shall repay, he will prolong the time, and return the words of grief, and complain of the time.
Exactly. These are the lazy people. This is not everyone. This is talking about the sluggards and these people who don't know the value of hard work. These people, they'll be your best friend. They'll be all buddied up to you. They'll worship the ground you walk on because they need something, And as soon as they get it, you won't hear from them. And then, when you try to call to get it back, maybe not to collect the debt, but maybe you're, in time of need, or you might genuinely need that money back. It's a problem. What you come over here for this money for? We've been there. We've all been there. And so,
hey, fix your phone, brother. Fix your phone. Salakia, fix your phone, brother, because you're muddling so far. Fix your phone.
Do you hear me now?
That's better.
So, Salakia. Yeah, these people will worship the ground that you walk on, until they get the money. And then when you come, to get repayment, that's what the terms, they're going to complain. They're going to give you hell. Continue.
Verse 6. If he prevail, he shall hardly receive the half, and he will count as if he had found it. If not, he had deprived him of his money, and he hath gotten him an enemy without cause. He pays him with cursings and railings, and for honor he will pay him disgrace. Verse 7. Many therefore have refused to lend for other means ill-dealing, fearing to be defrauded.
So because of people out here like this who are freeloaders, who take advantage of people, who it says that would pay them honor with shame, basically. The people did an honorable thing, helped his brother out when he was in time of need, but it's just given, this righteous act, he turned evil. And because of that, people don't want to help others. And you even see that, we see that all the time. Even within our own body, people are wary of dealing financially with brothers and sisters because they've been burned so many times in the past. Let's move on. Let's go on to, we're going to jump down to verse 22. But there's nothing worse than someone who's a freeloader, or someone who borrows something with no real effort to pay back what they owe. Sometimes a person's character can hinder a person from receiving help in times of need due to their sluggard ways. You know, so sometimes you're roaming around and you're like, why won't nobody help me? You know, these people are supposed to be righteous people and such, and I thought they said they serve the Most High and they love AHAYAH, you know, but at the same time, they see your works, they see your fruits, they see that you haven't done nothing. And so, you know, why should they help you? Well, yeah, we're going to jump down to verse 22. Continue.
Verse 22. Better is the life of a poor man in a mean cottage than delicate fare in another man's house.
You know, so it's better for you to be broke in a little cottage somewhere than to, you know, be living high on the hog off another man. Continue.
Verse 23. Be it little or much, hold thee contented, that thou hear not the reproach of thy house. For it is a miserable life to go from house to house, for where thou art a stranger, thou darest not open thy mouth. 25. Thou shalt entertain and feast, and have no thanks. Moreover, thou shalt hear bitter words. Come, thou stranger, and furnish the table, and feed me of that thou hast ready. 27. Give place, thou stranger, to an honorable man. My brother cometh to be lodged, and I have need of mine house. 28. These things are grievous to a man of understanding, the upbraiding of house room and reproaching of the lender.
You know, and this is not a good situation to be in. You know, the scripture explained this pretty clearly. Let's move on. We're going to go to Book of Sirach. We're going to go stay in Book of Sirach. I'm going to go down to chapter 40. I'm going to read verse 28. Once again, the Book of Sirach, chapter 40, verse 28.
Sirach, chapter 40, verse 28. My son, lend not to a beggar's life, for better is it to die than to beg.
There's people out there that make a career out of begging. I know you guys seen them, and to be honest, I can't say they're the most foolish people because they're out there. Some of these beggars, you know, these panhandlers, some of these guys they're making money. You know, they get the little spots, their little go-throughs. You know, some of these cats make $60,000, $70,000 a year. You know, while you broke, you know, you see that beggar in the same place every day in the street. He might get up, you know, go around the corner, put on his jacket, and go home to his mansion. You never know. But the beggar's life is not a good life to living. Continue.
29. The life of him that dependeth on another man's table is not to be counted for a life, for he polluteth himself with other men's meat. But a wise man, well nurtured, will beware thereof.
You know, so it says if you're dependent on a man, we shouldn't even consider that living. You know, this is what the scriptures are telling us. Read.
30. Begging is sweet in the mouth of the shameless, but it is his belly there shall burn a fire.
You know, so living off the hard work of another it's not life. You know, only fools can be comfortable freeloading off of someone else. And so we have to be careful. And this is not to accuse anyone. This is so we can identify the mindsets of others. You know, because to be honest, that's leaven in the lump, and we don't need that. You know, we need people who are going to work hard. We're going to be like the ants, like we spoke of at the beginning. Let's go to. We're going to skip down, actually, brother. We're going to go over to Sirach, chapter 27, verse 3. Once again, that's the book of Sirach, chapter 27, verse 3.
Sirach, chapter 27, verse 3. Unless a man hold himself diligently in the fear of the Most High AHAYAH, his house shall soon be overthrown. 4. As when one sitteth with a sieve, Slakia, the refuse remaineth. So the filth of the man is his talk.
And so it always goes back to following the Most High, and doing His will. It always goes back to that. Every lesson we give goes back to that. Even you trying to be self-sufficient and learning to work hard and break this programming that they've left us with. Always goes back to following the Most High and what He's told us to do. Let's go back to Proverbs. I'm going to go to Proverbs chapter 31 and verse 10. Once again, the book of Proverbs, chapter 31, verse 10. And it takes constant evaluation of ourselves through the scriptures, even when it comes down to the question of whether we're hard workers or not, or we're sluggards, in our you might be doing good on most things, but you might be being a little lazy in others. We have to be careful, because when we make it a practice to be a sluggard, it also translates into, how we serve the Most High. So that's going to be the book of Proverbs, chapter 31, verse 10.
Proverbs, chapter 31, verse 10. Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. Verse 11. The heart of her husband doth safely trust in her, so that he shall have no need of spoil. 12. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. 13. She seeketh wool and flax, and worketh willingly with her hands. 14. She is like the merchant ships. She bringeth her food from afar. 15. She riseth also, yet it is yet night, and giveth meat to her household, Salakia, and a portion to her maidens.
And look at this sister. This sister, so far, she's putting in work. She's getting up early. She has her own business. It's nothing she's doing right here is easy. And there's an example for sisters too, because a lot of people think, it's the man's job to provide, everything. Which, yes, it's the man's job to provide, but the man has a helpmeet. So especially if you're in a relationship, it shouldn't be just all on the man to bring everything in. There's nothing wrong with a woman bringing coin to the table at all. Continue.
16. She considereth a field and buyeth it. With the fruit of her hands she planteth a vineyard. 17. She girdeth her loins with strength, and strengthened her arms. 18. She perceiveth that her merchandise is good. Her candle goeth not out by night. 19. She layeth her hands to the spindle, and her hands hold the distaff. 20. She stretcheth out her hands to the poor. Yea, she reacheth forth her hands to the needy.
So a sister in the truth, just like the brothers, she has to be diligent, to make sure they're doing her part for the house, working hard. And because and brothers, don't get it twisted at all. Raising children and taking care of a house is, to be honest, harder than most of our jobs. And don't discount what the sister's doing at home. She has to work too. But we have this mentality nowadays where, like I said, we're back in the microwave generation. I'll say it is, and everything's so easy. And this goes back into a lot of different things about being self-sufficient and working hard. It's very easy for us to just pop something in the microwave, for example. When instead of, we're radiating our food, which is not good for us. I've never heard any situation where radiation is a good thing, and it's just this quick, instant thing where it would have been better for us to take the time, put the work in, chop up the potatoes, chop up the onions, flour the chicken, fry it up, saute, the vegetables, whatever it is. It might have took longer, but in the end of it, that work pays off because the food you have has way more sustenance than what you might be cooking up in that microwave. And so it goes all around, from every little thing, from when we're working to when we're spraying the true, when we're cooking our food, when we're cleaning our house. All these things we have to, learn to maybe start doing things a little bit the harder way, which I know is hard for some of us to hear, but that's where we're headed, brothers and sisters. Things are going to get tough. You're not going to be able to get no gas for that car one day. There might not be no electricity for that microwave one day. You might have to learn to make you a fire, and roast some stuff, over the hot flame. These are the things we should be thinking of. I'm not saying you got to live your life like this right now, but you should be preparing, and making it a habit to do things the hard way. Let's move on. Let's go over to the book of Matthew, chapter 12, verse 25. Once again, that's the book of Matthew, chapter 12, verse 25.
The book of Matthew, chapter 12, verse 25. And YASHAYA knew their thoughts, and said unto them, Every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself shall not stand.
Now, when it's saying divided, it's not just saying divided in doctrine, or of course it's talking about that, but it's also talking about in how we work. If everyone's just trying to do their own thing, it's not going to happen. And I'll go back to the example I gave with the ants. One ant, if every ant just tried to drag their own twig, none of the twigs would have made it to whatever it is they were going to use that twig for. But it looked like maybe 30 or 20 or 30 of the ants, all bound together, for the work of their kingdom. And the ants is actually a really good example of a kingdom and how it should work. Yes, they have a queen, but in our kingdom we have a king. And everyone just does their job. Everyone goes out, whatever work they have to do, whether yours is gathering food, or yours is gathering building materials, or yours is constructing a shelter, or whatever it may be. Yours is taking care of the children, and whatever. It's a very good example of how our kingdom needs to start to work. The scriptures are manyfold. They're never just saying one thing. He's telling us a lot right here. He's telling us, it's not about what I have, what you have, what you have, what you have. It's what we have together, just like in the book of Acts, chapter 4. This is why they brought everything in. It made all things common, because it's about the kingdom. It's not about any individual one of us. And as a body, we must understand this key point, as well as any members of our household. We must understand that there's going to be spirits out there that are going to be lazy and sluggards, and they're going to destroy this work if we allow them, to be around and continue in their ways. And those issues of strife can really eat away at the structure and ultimately destroy not only the person, but the whole entire body, just by having that person around. Because, we're all working hard, and we see, if I said, I'm working hard, Elder Gabar and Brother Marquise, AHAYAH, we're all working hard, and the Malach is leaned up against the fence post somewhere talking to some girl, we're going to be upset. It's going to cause strife and division, and that could destroy us all. And so that's why we all have to get in the habit of working hard, putting everything in that we can. Let's move on. Let's go over to Matthew, chapter 24, and we're going to start at verse 42. Once again, that's the book of Matthew, chapter 24, verse 42.
Matthew, chapter 24, verse 42. Watch therefore, for ye know not what hour your Lord doth come. 43. But know this, that if a good man of the house had knoweth in what watch the thief would come, he would have watched, and would not have suffered his house to be broken up. 44. Therefore, be ye also ready, for in such an hour as ye think not, the Son of Man cometh. 45. Who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom his Lord hath made ruler over his house, to give them meat in due season?
So what y'all think Most High, or Slaki, what y'all think Yeshaya is going to think? Me, Elder Gabar, Brother Kayal, who else? Us three. You know, I'm not picking on you, Deacon Malak. I know you would never do this. That's why I'm saying it. You know, we all out here, we in the trenches, we putting the work in, and this brother over here, he just chilling. What y'all think the results of that's going to be? You know, it's a rhetorical question. We all know what it is. Continue.
Verse 46. Blessed is that servant whom the Most High AHAYAH, when he cometh, Slakia, whom his Lord, when he cometh, shall find so doing. Verse 47. Surely I say unto you, that he shall make him ruler over all his goods. 48.
So me, Elder Gabar, Brother Kayal, we gonna become rulers. Let's see what's gonna happen to Mala'ak. Continue.
48. But and if that evil servant shall say in his heart, my Lord delayeth his coming. 49. And shall begin to smite his fellow servants, and to eat and drink with the drunken. 50. The Lord of the servant shall come that in a day when he looketh not to him, and in an hour that he is not aware of. 51. And cut him asunder, and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
And that's going to be a tough situation for the people out here who are supposed to be doing this work and not doing this work. You know, and life shows you that. You know, you can't grow. You can't put anything in a vineyard and just expect it to grow. It takes work. You know, you got to go out there and weed the ground. You got to water the ground. You know, you got to trim and prune. You know, the leaves off the different plants. It takes work. You know, and at the end of it, you have fruit. You have a reward. But the person who thinks they can just throw the seeds out there and just chill and go sit back and drink and party and think they're going to come back a couple months later and have a bountiful garden, they're sadly mistaken. You know, and the scriptures tell us, you know, there's going to be weeping and gnashing of the teeth. The gnashing of teeth is like an intense grinding. You know, it's not something I want to be experiencing. So being a good workman in the household and in this body is really being compared to how diligent, you know, you must be in the faith. You know, it all goes hand in hand. Just as much work as you put into the Most High is probably about as much work as you put in, you know, to your worldly duties, and vice versa. Let's move on. Let's go over to the book of Romans, chapter 13. Verse 10. Once again, it's the book of Romans, chapter 13, verse 10. You know, and also remind everyone, like, if you're not diligent in this life, you know, and your responsibilities, and you're one to, like, constantly procrastinate, you're going to do the same thing in the truth. You know, you're going to think, oh, I got time to get right. You know, I'm just going to, you know, really being lazy about it. You know, your shine's going to come back on you, and you're going to be upset, you know, about your state of being. You know, the Most High and Christ are going to reward the good servants, you know, who stay on point, you know, and they're watching over the Father's affairs and doing his work. You know, we must overcome our conditioning so that our spiritual walk does not suffer, you know. So, once again, we're going to read in Romans chapter 13, verse 10.
The book of Romans, chapter 13, verse 10. Love worketh no ill to his neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. Verse 11. And that, knowing the time, that now it is high time to awake out of sleep. For now is our salvation nearer, and when we believed. 12. The night is fair spent, the day is at hand. Let us therefore cast off the works of darkness, and let us put on the armor of light. 13. Let us walk honestly as in the day, not in rioting or drunkenness, not in chambering and wantonness, not in strife and envying. 14. But put ye on the Lord, YASHAYA Christ, and make not provision for the flesh to fulfill the lust thereof.
How many of you know it takes hard work to get rid of a demon or a spirit? It's not a simple task. First and foremost, we're not YASHAYA. We don't have the full, working of the Holy Spirit. But it takes work and dedication and resolve and stamina and power to fight off spirits and principalities. And if you're not used to doing that hard work of, intensely fasting and praying, doing the Most High's work, staying in the Scriptures, being diligent, constantly, you're going to be weak spiritually, and you're going to be subject to attacks left and right. So once again, I implore everyone, to do these hard things. It's not easy to fast, for 3-4 days. I'm not saying start with that, but build up to that. Why do I say that? Because in the times ahead, there's going to be a famine. And if you haven't done the hard work of fasting for periods of time, you're more likely to take that mark because you're going to be hungry. There's things that we have to do for not only the spiritual battle that we're ahead, but there's a physical battle going on too. They are out here trying to kill us. Don't get it twisted. But let's go back to Proverbs real quick. I know we've been in here a lot, but Proverbs is good. I highly recommend everyone read through Proverbs, once a month. It's not that long of a book, but it'll keep you rooted in, wisdom on how you should be conducting yourself. We're going to go back to Proverbs. I'm going to go back to chapter 19, verse 15. Once again, that's the book of Proverbs, chapter 19, verse 15.
The book of Proverbs, chapter 19, verse 15. Slothfulness casteth into a deep sleep, and an idle soul shall suffer hunger.
Read it again.
Slothfulness casteth into a deep sleep, and an idle soul shall suffer hunger.
I want you guys all to think about those so-called Christians out there who have actually been too lazy to read through the Scriptures themselves. I know you guys know the precepts that can line up with this in particular proverb. Because we did the work, which is not easy. I know many of us searched for years for this truth. I know my journey was at least a few years in the making, just like many others. Searched for years for the truth. Because we were diligent and we did that hard work, it actually kept us awake and alert to what was going on. Awake, alert enough to see the truth when we got to it. But those people out there who just listen to what their pastor said and not doing any real hard work, getting in this Bible, studying it, deciphering it, they're asleep. The Scriptures tell us that time and time again. Let's go. We'll move on. That's all. I'm going to leave that there. We're going to go to the book of 1 Timothy, chapter 5, verse 11. Once again, that's 1 Timothy, chapter 5, verse 11. And just to speak a little bit more on Proverbs 19:15, at the end of it, it says, and an idle soul shall hunger. Now it's talking about physically being hungry, but it's also talking about the people who don't put in the spiritual work. The people in these churches, people in these other religions, they're spiritually famished, starving, looking for food, and because they're in the microwave generation, they eating that hot pot because it's got no nutrients, it's all chemicals, it's adulterated, it's not even, doesn't even have what they say it's in there. They're not getting any nutrition spiritually, and so they remain stagnant. And when you don't have nutrition, you will be sleepy, you will be tired, you won't have energy. We'll move on. Once again, that's going to be 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 11.
1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 11. But the younger widows refuse, for when they have begun to wax and wanton against Christ, they will marry. 12. Having damnation, because they have cast off their first faith. 13. And withal, they learn to be idle, wandering about from house to house, and not only idle, but chancellors also, and busybodies, speaking things which they ought not. 14. I will therefore that the younger woman marry, bear children, guide the house, give none occasion to the adversary to speak reproachfully. 15. For some are already turned aside after Satan.
And this is talking about younger widows here, but it's a very good example of what happens when you're just sitting around doing nothing. You start gossiping, you start getting into all kinds of stuff, especially with this internet. This internet and being lazy and being a sluggard, it's a dangerous, dangerous trap. And when you remain idle, physically and spiritually, then Satan's going to come in and he's going to have a ball, and he's going to tempt you left and right. And most likely you're going to fall into some type of foolishness because you're just sitting around instead of doing some work, And so we have to be aware of this. We have to be very, very aware of this. This is going to be the last scripture for the night. It's going to be Romans chapter 6, verse 5. Once again, it's the book of Romans chapter 6, verse 5.
The book of Romans, chapter 6, verse 5. For if we have been planted together in the likeness of his death, we should be also in the likeness of his resurrection. 6. Knowing this, that our old man is crucified with him, that the body of sin might be destroyed, that henceforth we should not sin. 7. For he that is dead is freed from sin. 8. Now if we be dead in Christ, we believe that we shall also live with him.
Now, a lot of times, the person we were in the world was, a person who might have procrastinated, they might have been lazy, they might have not used to putting in hard work. But 1 John chapter 2, 3 through 6 says, if we abide in Christ, we shall also walk as he walked. And YASHAYA was no lazy man. He was no sluggard. He was walking from country to country, from area to area, working through the night sometimes. He was always doing his Father's business. And he was out there physically doing the work, and he was spiritually doing the work, staying prayed up, staying fasted up, fighting the spiritual battle on the front line. And so we should follow the example of YASHAYA. You probably would never found him sitting on the couch somewhere, smoking a blunt, eyes glazed over on the TV, internet. You really never see YASHAYA being idle at any moment in the scriptures. If he was somewhere, he was praying, he was prophesying, he was preaching, he was healing, he was teaching, he was doing something. And the same thing goes when we're following the Most High. The same thing goes, the same thing goes for when we're in this world and we're working. There's always something we can be doing. Always something we can be doing. So with that, family, I'll say Tawada and Shalom.